Okay, we are live.
All right, the meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the September 12th, 2022 meeting of the City of Asheville Noise Advisory Board. My name is Jessica Thomason, and I am the chair and voting member of the board. I will introduce each agenda item and facilitate the meeting to help our audience follow along. All committee members and staff are participating virtually today. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the Noise Advisory Board page. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. I will now go through and introduce all the board members who are participating virtually today. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, please unmute your microphone. Board members, as I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Rick Freeman.
Here.
Anoop Krishnan. Carmelo Papalonio.
Here.
Jeff Santiago. Reb Hazlip. Did I say that right? Hazlip?
Here.
Okay. Liliana Woody.
Here.
And Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Hello.
Also with us today are staff members Ben Woody, Haley Mahoney.
Good afternoon. Sorry.
All good.
Hello.
Noise Administrator Todd Justice.
Here.
And I believe Chris is also on, and Chris Collins. Thank you everyone for being here today. So our first order of business is to approve the minutes from our last meeting on June 13th. If everybody has had an opportunity to take a look at those from Monday, June 13th. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 13th?
I move to approve.
Rick moves to approve. Can I get a second motion, please?
I'll second.
Carmelo seconds. Okay, so can I get in a yay or a nay from Liliana Woody?
Yay.
Reb Hazlip?
Yes.
And yay for me as well. So motion carried. Approval of minutes from June 13th. Meeting is approved. Our next order of business is that we have 2 new board members. So I'd love to give an opportunity for Reb and Liliana to introduce themselves to the rest of the group and to anyone watching. Reb, would you like to go first?
Sure, happy to. I'm Reb Hazlip. I live in the Beaver Dam neighborhood and am a semi-retired architect. I've been involved in noise-related issues and the development of the city ordinance for some number of years, starting with Kenilworth, working through the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods and being on the technical advisory committee for CAN to help develop the new noise ordinance. So that's a little background. Delighted to be here.
Thanks for being here. Liliana?
Hi, I'm Liliana Woody. We have a business in West Asheville, and I'm on the West Asheville Business Association board members.
We appreciate both of you and your time being here today. And welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next order of business is to get the staff report, and I just want to make sure everyone had an opportunity to take a look at that as well. And ask if there are any questions about the staff report.
Haley, are you going to present the staff report?
No, we're not presenting the staff reports. We're just providing them and then giving you all time to ask questions if you have questions. So that's how we do it for some of the other boards that I work with as well. There's one particular part of it you want me to zoom to, let me know.
It's okay.
Yeah, so feel free, any of, Reb or Liliana, if you have questions, because this is your first meeting, please don't hesitate to ask. If you want, some clarification on any of this information. I know that this, as being a new board, we've sort of gone through and staff's worked with us to get a better understanding of how these calls are taken and how they're, how they're taken, and then how they're researched, and what stays open and what stays closed. So if you have some questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Will do.
Great. Well, if there's no questions about the staff report, then what we'll do is we'll move on to our old business, which is the first order of business is a working group update, which we have 2 of those. So the first one would be about the decibel levels. And Rick, you want to give an update about that and then talk about the survey?
Sure. So the working group was made up of Jeff Santiago and I, and we met virtually 2 times, second time over email. The objective of the survey was to follow up with complainants who complained, obviously, and the noise source was from a commercial property, therefore it fell under the part of the ordinance that would require a decibel reading. Compliant staff went out and made decibel readings, and the decibel readings were below the maximum limit allowed. And therefore the feedback to the complainant was that there's no violation. And so in our role to evaluate all components of the noise ordinance, we thought we would go back to all of those complainants and try to get some additional detail on the qualitative impact of those noise sources on their lives as a beginning point to understand whether the decibel levels as set in the ordinance are actually doing what the public expects. So we came up with a set of questions, which are linked in the staff report. So if Haley could display them, we would show them to the team for discussion and for approval or modification. I also, in this process, learned a lot about how boards and commissions are expected to communicate with the public. And so this version has actually been reviewed by Dawa Hitch, who's in charge of CAPE. Her main goals in my conversation with her was to set appropriate expectations to the people who are going to be surveyed and to tell them what they're in for and how the information is to be used. And so the section in bold, second paragraph, is basically the text that I added that she said fulfilled that obligation. I don't plan to read all these. What we would do with this, based on feedback from the board and whether they're satisfied with it, we would then work with compliance staff to figure out how to get this information out to those complainants who fit this category. So at this point, I'd just take questions, I think, from staff or the board.
Rick, did I understand you to say that you had actually gone on a field measurement?
No, I have not.
You have not?
No, not since the ordinance has been approved.
Okay.
I went on field measurements with Ben Woody and Sage Turner around Kenilworth and Mission Hospital prior to the ordinance being approved.
All right. I misunderstood what you said. Okay.
No worries. We did, before starting this group, which was actually before Todd joined the team, we did run this concept by staff at that point in time, and compliance staff at that time did offer the advisory board members who would participate in this access to a properly calibrated meter if we ultimately concluded that taking measurements inside the residence where the residents feel the impact of the noise would be of value. So that's why question number 8, while rather vague, reaches out to the complainant and says, would you be willing to allow us, the royal us, in there to observe the sound level, and what's implied is potentially take a measurement just so that we can understand the actual dBA levels that they're experiencing, assuming that it is repeatable and continuous so that we could actually get there at a time when the sound is present.
But there are no sound level limits for residential districts, right?
There are no sound level limits for residential districts. So these are only complaints from residential districts that are adjacent to commercial districts where the noise source is in the commercial district.
Rick, I have a question for you. Is the thought that you would send these questions out as they are, or would you make them, where people write their answers in, or would they be like a multiple choice, like yes, yes, no sort of thing? Or like, what's your thought on that? Just in terms, what I'm just thinking of is my reason for asking is thinking in order to get people to fill these things out, to make it as easy as possible for them so we actually get the feedback. And I'm thinking maybe it might be easier if it's like, have you contacted the source of the complainant? Yes or no? For some of the ones, just to make it a little bit easier.
I'm certainly open to improvement in these questions, making it clear that it's yes or no answer. Those would be great recommendations. My thought on how this is going to get to the complainant is depends on what information city staff has as an actual mechanism to contact the complainant. In some cases, they may only have an email address, in which case it would be fairly simple to turn this into a Google form and an appropriate link in order to collect all that information so that it would be in one place. Until we got through the point where the board would agree to proceed, I haven't begun to work with Todd to actually understand what contact information we have with these complainants. And so I don't know what the split's going to be between digital and telephone.
Okay. I think they're all good questions. I think they're valid questions in terms of getting to the answer of how people feel after the experience that they've had. So.
And anybody else, any of the other board members have any thoughts or considerations or improvement recommendations at this point?
I agree with what Jessica said, and I think this is a good framing of the questions, Rick. And Jeff, I saw you just joined too. I mean, it pretty much, I see what you're doing. You're trying to cover all the bases here to provide as much background context for everyone to kind of assess the data and everything. And I especially like, you put question 2 pretty much at the top, right after the first question being a more technical question, where that will give, the board and the team more background information on how they can approach the broader issue about, the relationship between the complainant and the source and everything. Because obviously what this does is it not only gives us information, but also pinpoints where and how we might need to kind of jump in and, negotiate and everything between the complainant and the source. So I think it's good.
So, as a matter of sort of protocol here, I guess the question before Jessica, since you brought up some potential improvements, could we vote on this as is with improvements recommended, on the side, or do we need to make these improvements and bring them back to the board before we can proceed? I guess that's what I want to be clear on.
I think you guys are in really good shape with this, just in terms of what you've done. I think, like, my suggestion was more so of just trying to make it more accessible, like to get as many results as you can. The only other feedback that I would give, and I don't feel like this needs to happen before voting, is like, because constant and intermittent can be open to interpretation. So I would say, how often are you dealing with this? And maybe make that a multiple choice of like every day, twice a week, three, because what's constant to me might be different for constant for you, or intermittent. So that's my only thing, just in terms of being, leaving anything that could be open to interpretation and actually be an actual data point versus, that. I think other than that, I think that we can vote on this now, just to say it's, it's in a good place. And then anything else is just working out the fine details, which I feel like the noise compliance team will have a lot more to say about it, just in terms of what they need as well to send out, or for us to send out what makes the most sense based on their experience with complainants.
Okay.
So you want to go ahead and vote on this? Okay. All in favor of, can I get a motion to approve the survey questions from the decibel level working group?
So
I make the motion.
Rick makes the motion to approve. Reb, did I hear a second from you? Okay, great. Can I hear from the rest of the board members? Liliana Woody?
Approved.
Jeff Santiago, welcome. Can I get a motion to approve or deny from you? Jeff, are you still here?
He's on mute. He's giving us a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay, I can't see him. He's not in my thing. Okay. Carmelo?
Approve.
And I approve as well. So the survey questions for the decibel level working group are approved. All right. So next order of business is the other working group which we have, which is sound mitigation. And we have, you have received in the group of documents a good neighbor and sound mitigation practices that have been worked on by myself and Jeff Santiago, Carmelo Pompolonio, and also Granier Miser, who was with the noise compliance team, who has since left. And so we basically, just to give a little background to the new folks, basically we're looking to create some best practices for both residents and for businesses that we could put on the website. That's just sort of like, here's some things to think about and consider, while also giving some examples of what people can expect with the noise ordinance, and then also giving direction on what to do when they do have an issue. So Carmela, would you mind taking us through this? Through some of the bullet points of this?
Yeah, of course. So basically, for those who are just joining us for the first time, or who might need a little refresher on this, the first thing we realized when kind of putting this together is that we're basically just trying to find out how to word the golden rule, do unto others, in various ways, to be more specific for both, residential issues, commercial issues, and everything like that. So we wanted this to provide adequate information. So when people are kind of searching online to look for more background context as to how they should approach a potential situation where they feel like the decibel level or the ordinance is being breached, this would provide some of that background context and additional supplementary information right next to and directly in line with the pathway to actually filing a complaint. So yeah, basically going down the quick little bullet list at the top. The first one was just being considerate and mindful of your surroundings and being aware of how sound carries. More often than not, no one's trying to be a jerk and, intentionally just blast a bunch of sounds to, be a public menace or harass their neighbors and community members and everything. It's typically, accidents or etc. So we just wanted to put something in there that's like, if you're having a barbecue, if you're setting up an amplifier in your house and you're playing guitar, or you have music speakers or et cetera, just considering how the sound waves carry, if you're sharing a wall, if you're not, everything like that. So the second one was be informed when you can and shouldn't make the noise. And this information, this list itself will be included on the webpage that has all the more specific details on the ordinances, on the ordinance and the times of decibel limits and everything like that. So it's just saying like, basically if you're here and you're reading this, you're already doing the right thing. It's the first good step. The third one is be respectful. If a neighbor asks you to turn your music down, be considerate of their circumstances and oblige. And that is just trying, it's another extension of our kind of mission to facilitate good neighbor relations instead of just simply, hey, there might be an issue. I'm just going to immediately skip all this and escalate it and call the cops or something like that, or, just immediately jumping to writing a scathing email or, trying to get some investigation where you spur the city to address it right here, right now, when really the source of the sounds might still be in compliance. We just wanted to facilitate good neighbor relations because what we've heard from Daniel and Granier and the noise team is that the data shows and their field work shows, and when they talk to people out in the field and everything, that's just having a conversation with someone goes so far, and it prevents repeat, offenses, if you will, complaints and everything like that. And it just helps add to that community cohesion and build better levels of communication. So we wanted to add that in there too. And then the last one is be proactive. And then that's kind of touching on the being informed and respectful and considerate, but just giving a little bit more detailed examples, I suppose. So it says there, if you're, I don't know if you have this pulled up because on my screen it's just black in the chat, but I guess everyone else can see it okay?
We can see it.
Okay, cool. Good. Yeah, so as you can see, if you're planning a party, practicing an instrument, like I said, guitars, drums, I'm a drummer myself, and I know that if you play drums in a building, you will be able to hear the drums wherever you are in the building. Stuff like that, just being considerate, being in touch with your neighbors beforehand goes so far, and we're really trying to encourage that line of thinking where, most people will hear that suggestion and be like, oh yeah, of course, that's super easy, or I just didn't even think about doing that, and they will. So yeah, being a good neighbor can go a long way. It minimizes the need to report an issue. We are not trying to deter any sort of action when there actually really is a problem. This is really just to, again, provide people with more adequate information to handle it more appropriately and at the same scale of the problem, rather than unnecessarily escalating things or just, never having a line of communication with their neighbors. So yeah, in many cases, being a good neighbor avoids a small issue becoming a problematic situation. And that kind of just having a conversation with your neighbor goes so far and clears up any misconceptions and opens up that line of dialogue in the community for future situations, which could be noise related or not, so beyond. So Jessica, did you want me to continue to kind of give a more broad overview of this, or should we just break this down as a group from here?
Yeah, I think, we can just that's great. I mean, just giving an idea of what I was looking for is just why we made this and and I think you did a great job of that. So I think everyone can take a look at it from here and see, we go on to talk about, what to do when you're experiencing excessive noise. And then also we wanted to put some information in there also, if you see, just in terms of some of the things that the noise compliance team has already set up in terms of multifamily housing, for instance, having people, directing them to make sure that their first line of action is contacting the property manager or tenant or homeowners association, instead of just, if that's at all a possibility, because there's been so much work that's already been done with the noise compliance team and the multifamily housing units across the city to be ready and able to deal with that. Of course, within reason, we talk about that too, in terms of like contacting the noisemaker, but of course, never wanting people to do something if it's inappropriate to do that, if it's something where people feel like their safety is at risk or anything of that sort. But also put some information in here too about example of what the decibel level limits are, what an expectation of a noise, what at that decibel level is. And then we go on to address businesses with indoor outdoor music, and then so on and so forth. And how to, if you want to keep scrolling down. So how to get your staff engaged, how to get your patrons engaged, right? Because we've seen some of this where there's been some complaints. And this is, again, looking at some of that data that we've already gotten and just understanding that patios can be loud and how to work to mitigate that and just be a good business owner. And then also being proactive with giving people the opportunity to contact DSD to be able to do some, get some readings and talk about some other options for them to be respectful neighbors.
And really quick, I guess it should just be noted on the table that obviously one of the reasons why we're doing this is anyone can go online and look at the actual noise ordinance and say, oh, X decibels for X area at X time. And we know that that's, going to be it is readily available for Asheville citizens. But the reasoning behind this document was also to kind of make the whole situation more accessible and digestible for the average layperson who might not, have a in-depth knowledge and understanding of exactly how decibels work. So we wanted to just kind of provide, clear up some of the gray area too. And so that's why at first we were just kind of saying let's, be reasonable, refer to the noise ordinance and everything, but here's all this background context which can help you navigate that, because we understand, not everyone is going to have a decibel meter, and that's just a fact. And I've worked with decibels for forever, but they work on a logarithmic scale, and it's not a very intuitive math problem to crunch out when you're in a situation where something might be annoying you volume wise. So one of the things that we added, Rick, with your suggestion from the last meeting was toward the top when it says if you're experiencing excessive noise, we have the second bullet point there that just says be reasonable. And you suggested, Rick, that we would probably benefit from at least having an example of the decibel scale. So we put the blue text in there of, for example, in the CBD, the dB limit is from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., 67 decibels, which is roughly the equivalent to a hairdryer or vacuum. If this noise is loud from where you are on your property, there may be an issue. So there's two things there. It's the clarifying example of one example of that particular decibel level and what they could equate to, but also it's trying to clarify as well that it's not that you hear a hairdryer or vacuum in the distance, it's that it is equivalent to that volume as if you were next to the hair, because there has been some misunderstandings with that as well. But we tried to clarify that too. So we did, with your suggestion from last time, Rick, add that in there as well. And as always, we are open to other suggestions before moving forward for all of this. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thoughts, questions from board members? Concerns, anything?
Is this final from your guys' perspective? Is this ready to go website? Are you asking for a vote? or? 'Cause-
Well, I mean, we're asking for feedback, and if not feedback, then we feel that it's website ready.
We would like to have this supplementary information readily accessible for people sooner than later, because we feel like the whole mission was to get this out there so it kind of inframes the whole complaint situation in a more nuanced but accessible at the same time light. So anything that we can get out there to basically help clarify some stuff that seems to be repeat issues given from the data and feedback from Daniel and Granier. Yeah, it would help.
Haley, can you scroll up so we can read the bottom again? Since the document wasn't provided in advance, this is the first opportunity to read it.
It was put in the
I had it in the
folder.
meeting folder. It's
Yeah.
publicly accessible. It wasn't in the folder when it was first sent out, but it was added to prior to the meeting.
Right. But, okay, there was no link in the agenda, so it never occurred to me that this would be the reading.
The agenda was already publicly posted after it was received.
I mean, if you don't want to vote on it now, Rick, that's fine if you need more time to take a look at it.
No, I think I'm okay. It's not a change in policy. It's just attempting to clarify. I didn't know you were going to look for a vote, and so I wasn't really reading it in any real detail. I thought it was just an update. Just my mistake, I guess. Everything there seems okay to me.
Any other questions? Reb, do you have any questions? Liliana, any questions?
I don't. It seems reasonable.
Looks good to me, reasonable. Thank you.
If there's no other questions or concerns, can I get a motion to approve the good neighbor and sound mitigation tips to be put on the noise advisory board page, the city website?
I'll make a motion to do so.
Can I
I'll
get a
second.
Thank you, Liliana. Thank you, Jeff. Carmelo?
Approved. Aye.
Rick Freeman?
Yes.
Reb?
Yes.
And I approve. So those are overwhelming approval for the noise advisory board addition of the good neighbor and sound mitigation tips to the website. Thank you, everyone. We move on to new business. So first order of new business, I want to make a motion to remove Anoop Krishnan from the board. He has only attended, I believe, the first meeting that we've had of this committee. And I would like to make a motion to remove him so that we could get somebody else in his position.
I support that.
Okay, Carmelo, thank you. Rest of the board members, Jeff Santiago.
Yay.
Yay. Rick Freeman.
Hip, hip, hooray, yay.
Don't hide your enthusiasm there, buddy. Rep Haslib.
Yeah.
Liliana Woody.
Yes.
Okay, so we have unanimous approval of removing Anoop Krishnan from the board. Thank you very much, everyone. And Haley, I'm sure you'll let us know next steps in regards to getting his replacement.
Yep. I will get in touch with the city clerk and let them know that the motion was passed, and they should post it at their next posting, which I think probably won't be until either the end of this month or beginning of next month. But anyways, we should be able to get a new board member in place, I'm thinking by November at the latest.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, next order of new business is meeting frequency. Rick, you want to take that?
Yeah, so now that we have 2 new board members and this huge volume of year-long historical data and all that kind of stuff, I was thinking that maybe it was time we went back on an every month cycle, because we said, back at the beginning of the year that we needed a year of data before we felt comfortable analyzing the data with city staff and making policy recommendations. Well, in either 4 or 9 days, the ordinance will have been in effect for a year. So that data is year long. So I think we had gone to every 3 months because we're kind of waiting to collect that data. And we didn't really have active working groups back when we went to 3-month cycles. And now we've got the survey that we'll try to get out, and we'll have results coming in from that. So I'm proposing that we go back to a monthly cycle, open for discussion with the board. Otherwise, we wouldn't meet again until December, right? If I got the math right. Yeah, December.
December.
We can also hold a special meeting as like a retreat. An annual retreat. It's pretty common for boards to have one of those, and that can be a longer meeting. It could be held in person to make it like a lunch thing. There's options for the annual retreat. So if we didn't go back to every month, and that annual retreat option still sticks out there. If we go back to every month, the annual retreat option still is there as well. It would just mean maybe having 2 meetings 1 month.
How about every other month? That resolve it? Can we?
It's up to the board.
I like that idea.
I think it would be beneficial if we did the retreat that Haley's talking about. I'm just wondering if it would be good for us all to get in the same room with the data in sort of looking at everything. I'm not saying that as as opposed to, I'm just thinking we're looking at, if we look at every other, we're in September. So if we did every other, then we would do November, but then not December. I mean, how would that work? And then we would do January versus if we did if we could get, part of my thinking is like, can we get more work done? Can we get further along with doing the retreat, the staff retreat versus having a meeting each month? I don't know. I'm just adding that to the discussion of, I don't have an answer either way, but I guess the other question is looking at like what's the end result? Like what are we trying to do? And is meeting every month or doing the retreat, either of those things going to accomplish what we're trying to do?
I agree that the retreat sounds like a nice idea, but just a clarifying question, does the monthly meeting preclude the possibility of the retreat?
Is the retreat, is it like this? Is it live as well? Is it open to the public?
The retreat would be publicly posted. It would, it would be up to the public if they wanted to come, but it would be an open to the public sort of thing. We just, I think it's 72 hours that we need to make notice of for a special meeting of the sort. With planning, we'd probably give the city clerks much more notice than that. But yes, it would be open to the public. So we'd try to hold it somewhere where, you can even have an annual retreat at a restaurant if you wanted. It just has to be somewhere to where, if in theory, the public could show up. So we'd have to get a big table kind of thing just in case somebody showed up.
Okay.
But we could also hold it here at Public Works. I'd be happy to get you guys some lunch, make it a thing.
Part of my thinking, I like the retreat idea as well. Part of what's driving this is that the normal cycle of life for an advisory board is an annual report. And that annual report is due like the 15th of January or something like that, Haley. Isn't didn't we have to hustle at the last minute to get something done last year?
The annual reports
Oh,
are
yeah.
due in
Right.
January. It was a little bit of a crunch last year just because we'd
Yeah.
only had the one meeting. So the annual retreat's a really good time to discuss your goals for the upcoming year, what you've accomplished over the past year, and then it can be used for a lot of different things. But most groups use it as kind of goal setting time. But since you all haven't had a whole lot of time to, or no time at this point to meet in person, you could also use some of that time to work through some areas that you guys might want to have some deeper discussion on.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of the retreat regardless of whether we change the frequency or not. I've been involved in the boards and commissions, ongoing public input and all that sort of thing. And one of the big issues is that a lot of boards never make any formal recommendations. And I think there's at least a chance we're going to be far enough along, probably not to address all elements of the ordinance, but some of them to make, to not fail in that way, to say, we believe that this needs to happen, or this needs to change. And we've had some of those discussions with staff, city staff, and all that sort of thing. So if we could get a retreat in late October or early November or something, I mean, probably late October, then if there was homework coming out of that, we could squeak one more meeting in before the end of the year to approve, the annual report, which would have recommendations in it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think if we shoot for the end of October for doing a retreat, and then we have that meeting in December, then that feels like we've gotten, some extra time and does set us up so that we're not in that same position we were last year, albeit we only had one meeting, and then we actually have all of the data for the year, and we set some goals of what we want to put in that annual report in January and October. So I think that's a good idea. What's everybody else think about that?
Makes
I'm
sense.
fine.
Go ahead.
Makes sense.
But I would also add that I just assumed when I got on this board that it was every month anyway. So, and I'm not trying to load up on everybody's schedule, but you're going to get more done if you meet every month. It just creates greater accountability.
Personally, I could sway either way. I'm comfortable with either approach. I agree with what Reb just said, but again, the retreat does sound nice as well. Clarifying question: which of the two off months would the proposed retreat take place in again? I just missed it.
Next month, October.
Okay. Thank you.
So, if we met in October and we took homework and we either met again in November or early December, we'd essentially be meeting every month. And in that retreat, we can discuss a cycle for next year. Because, Reb, for the first 6 months of the year, we actually did meet every month. And we hadn't really started many working groups, or at least the working groups didn't have anything to bring to the board for voting and execution and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of why we dropped back to 3-month cycle. But in goal setting, like Haley said, we have that debate for what starts in January and how much we should go. And we're going to have hypothetically a third new board member by that time. And, Mondays at 1:00 may not work out for all the new board members, right? Because we had to go and work hard to find times that work for everybody. So it'd be a good time to cross that board again too.
Yeah. And I think, a lot's changed from when we first started meeting, because so much with this being a new board and having even this new, noise compliance team, so much of it was just getting data. In fact, part of what these meetings were, which I just thought of, is that each meeting staff was also presenting a different part of the noise ordinance because it's so expansive. And so we were going through each meeting and it was, waste pickup. It was, commercial areas. It was, all these different things. So getting it like the city staff were still just getting a handle on. I mean, we didn't even know how many multi family units the city had. And so that was part of so we were meeting and it was kind of like we were all getting this information together. So much of the first part of this board was just getting a handle on all of this information and how to take it and what to do with it. So, I think it'd be good now that after a year of us figuring out what's the data that we have and how can we be the most impactful in our mission. It would be I feel like that's going to dictate. So yeah, I think let's see if we can't figure that out. And I guess Haley, that'll come from you in terms of figuring out how dates and times that will work for all of us.
Yeah, I'll get a doodle poll out this week, probably be tomorrow. I'll try to go ahead and get it out because I know it can take us a while to land on a date time. So let me just make sure I'm following. We're going to do a annual retreat in October.
Correct.
And then did you want to meet in November at our normal time? Are we throwing in a November meeting as well in addition to December? Or do we just want to do our special meeting, and at our special meeting, we'll discuss meeting frequency for next year. And then that's when we'll pin down.
If I'm correct, I think everybody's under the impression we'll do the retreat and then do the December meeting. And then at the retreat, we'll figure out what we're doing for next year.
Sounds like we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll probably have, like Rick said, have some homework in between because, one of the next things that's coming up after we talk about waste hauler is another working group. And I kind of have a feeling like there's going to be some other working groups that are going to come out of this, which will then mean more work for us in between that retreat and the next month. So.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll be in touch about a special meeting for October as an annual retreat. And December will be at our normal date and time for sure. And then if you all want to amend the bylaws in December, and because we did write in your date time into the bylaws, so if we want to change that, we can cross that bridge in December after you all have had some time to discuss at the annual retreat.
Okay, great.
Do you have a preference as to when the annual retreat might be? Towards the end of October, perhaps? Or?
Well, I'll definitely probably shoot out this, our normal date and time as one of the options, just because I know it sometimes works. If anybody's out of town or unavailable, I'll make sure there's some other options for that as well. But I'm just going to kind of look at October and see as far as places we have available to meet go and what works well for staff, and then give you all multiple options to choose from. And then we'll go from there. If nothing works, we'll go back to the drawing board.
Hey Haley, do we have to stream an annual retreat?
No, from my understanding, there is no requirement to stream the annual retreat, but it does have to be open to the public.
Okay.
I will double check with the clerk's office on that, but I think that's my understanding.
Okay. Next order of business, waste hauler pickup. Rick, you want to take us through that?
Yeah, so this was before the ordinance was approved. There was a meeting with several of the waste haulers held at city offices. And what became clear during that meeting was the 5 o'clock time frame, 5 a.m. as the earliest time that waste haulers can start rocking the world of downtown residents, is at least partially related to the fact that the city does not coordinate with the businesses downtown. So 4 haulers may come and serve 4 different businesses all in the same alley every day. And so the only way they can get in and serve 4 different businesses all in the same alley on the same day, because they have to back their truck in and all that kind of stuff, is they have to get in there at 5 o'clock so that when people start showing up for work, they're not running over human beings as they back these trucks in and out of the alleys. Other cities, I think Charlotte was mentioned as an example. The downtown residents, the downtown business owners, and city staff have put a system in place where one hauler handles all the pickups on this alley, another hauler handles all the pickups on this other alley, and therefore they don't have to start at 5 o'clock in the morning waking people up by banging trash can lids. So it is, in my opinion, beyond the responsibility of the Noise Advisory Board to go work that, but it seems like we could make a recommendation to City Council to ask them to form a business leader, community leader, waste haul leader working group that would look into the ability to coordinate this as it has been done in other cities, and thereby reduce this source of wake you up at 5 o'clock in the morning noise, but hand that off to that community. And if ultimately the downtown residents aren't interested enough in participating and working through it with that, then those who complain occasionally aren't backed up by their neighbors, and therefore, I for one will cross this off as something that is actually a problem in the ordinance today with a 5 o'clock starting time. So if the board agrees with that approach, that's actually a recommendation that I'd be willing to, draft up somewhere between now and the retreat. And since, as the president of the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods and one of my board members sits on the downtown Asheville residents group, I could reach out to them, as we have concluded we can, to see if they would have interest. So I'd either come back at the retreat with a rough draft of a proposal to pass on to City Council, or I'd come back with nobody gives a darn, and so Rick gives up. How does that sound, gang?
Sounds like a plan.
Clarifying question. So basically, you're saying that with the current system, there's multiple waste management companies that are coming for a single given alley, street, what have you, and this system would change it where it would pretty much zone their operations by area, one company per area.
Yeah, and we in that meeting I was in, we didn't get into those details, but the goal would be no existing successful waste hauler would lose out on business as a byproduct of this. Let's say there's 4 waste haulers and there's 100 businesses downtown, and just for the sake of argument, say they all pay the same amount to get their waste hauled. Well, then the orchestration would make sure that all 4 of those guys still ended up with 25, but instead of needing to go to 16 alleys to serve 25 residents, businesses, they may only end up going to 4. And because they wouldn't be fighting for the same physical space for their trucks at the same time, they would agree that they could complete their work before it became a safety hazard to the public. So there's a lot of work there. This isn't something Rick can just write up on a chalkboard and say this will all work out fine. What I would say, in all fairness, and I don't, Ben's still here, he probably remembers better than me. The waste haulers present didn't seem to be opposed to this idea. If somebody would go orchestrate it and make sure that it didn't hurt their business. The sanitation person in attendance felt like that might be an overwhelming task for existing city staff. Hence, my approach that this would be a working group between businesses and residents. Because ultimately, I think the businesses that need a lot of trash pickup, like every day, are typically entertainment venues and restaurants and things like that. And they want the downtown residents to come over and eat there or drink there or enjoy the music there. So they seem like they'd have a lot in common. It just would take an effort to get them in the same room. And it would seem like City Council would want to weigh in on that effort. So that the path of least resistance is we make that recommendation and then let them carry it.
I think
Anybody?
go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if anybody else had any comments or thoughts.
I think it's worth a try. I think it's, I think it's an opportunity to solve an issue that we've seen. And so, if we can also, engage some citizens that are affected by this through DARN to, I think it's worth making a recommendation to City Council, barring anything that staff may want to tell us that we may not have that we're missing from making that recommendation. But it seems like something that could be complete. It seems like if it's been doable in other places, it's completely reasonable to not have to have 4 different waste companies going to the same alley and having to start at 5 a.m. so that they can each get in and get out, when it seems like one could do that at a reasonable hour before people are walking on the streets and not have to get run over by them.
May I also, though, say, I think some of the reasons why there may be 3 or 4 going to that location would be the pricing of it. So I don't know how that would be controlled. I think that's where there might be some argument or discussion on that.
Good
Because I
input.
know we shopped around for a better pricing, and there is some differences. So that's fair.
Yeah, that's a good point, Liliana. And that's part of, that's part of where we're lacking in terms of not knowing that information, and that may be a barrier for some businesses.
Or maybe
Maybe
not.
those businesses, it might improve their efficacy to be able to just hit one alley as opposed to moving through all these different alleys.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point too, from the waste hauler's perspective.
Right.
If they only have to hit one alley or 4 alleys, as Rick was saying, versus having to hit 10,
Right.
then that might be able to be something that, but then again, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work of somebody negotiating that and being that liaison between the businesses, the residents, city, and the waste haulers. So,
Well, I'm with Rick in the idea that it's only up to us to make a recommendation based on
Right.
the noise stuff, and,
Right.
and they have to work it out. So,
I say, yeah, go for it. I think, Rick, put something together for us to look at and reach out to your connections, and your relationships to see, just to gauge the level of interest of folks from DARN wanting to put the energy into participating.
Okay, I got it. Perfect.
I support it too. It does seem like a difficult situation to wrangle. There's a lot of moving parts. I mean, personally, I don't have any problems with regulations of the private sector that benefit the public good. That's I'm in full support of that. But just stating the obvious again, like if such a system kind of changes either the financial bottom line or stands as any sort of perceived or real inconvenience for any of these companies, we can certainly expect pushback. So I guess kind of getting all the ducks in a row and really weighing all the pros and cons. I mean, I'm interested in what a potential resolution would look like. So I support it.
Yeah, definitely. I love systems thinking, so I'm super curious to see how, like, what's all the moving parts in terms of where's the points of leverage in this system to make a change. Because I'm not going to pretend like I understand about, waste hauling and that sort of thing. I've certainly run several businesses, and restaurants being one of them in the past. So I know what that bottom line looks like with food costs and all the other expenses you have. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we can't, this recommendation can't be helpful. So thanks, Rick. Thanks for bringing that to the table. Okay, next new business we have is potential working group of vehicle noise. Who wants to take that? forgive me, I don't remember from our board meeting and there's not a name there. Is that something that someone already wants to take on? Or are we looking for somebody to take the lead as a working group for vehicle noise? I know there's been some back and forth in the emails, so.
I think if I remember correctly from our agenda setting meeting, Rick had proposed a few different areas that could be good for the board to examine. And looking at those different things, we were able to pinpoint that vehicle noise is something that comes up on the noise log from our complaints that we log very frequently. And the current ordinance as written, it doesn't give, there's not a whole lot that DSD staff can do to address the vehicle noise. So we were thinking that maybe a working group could look at what other places are doing to address vehicle noise and then see if there was something applicable that they could recommend for Asheville.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. Stop me if
Yeah,
Thanks for that refresher. Because I needed it. Yeah.
I think I started off this by just saying, kind of throwing my hands up and saying this part of the ordinance just sucks and doesn't work at all. So let's just tell city council that it doesn't work. But Todd, in responding to emails from citizens, has sort of opened my eyes to the nature of vehicles and law enforcement and civil versus misdemeanor. What can a policeman really do? When can they do it? What the circumstances are? And it's just more complicated than just being mad that it doesn't work at all. It seemed to me we got a bunch of email from one of the applicants who ultimately wasn't chosen for the noise advisory board that felt just very not served well, and maybe as a retired lawyer was eager to get engaged in this if we would form a working group and if we could bring other citizens into play. So I got religion of not just bitching that it was broken, and that instead we should try to make a recommendation on, with good thought from smart people, on how to make this more effective.
Gotcha. Okay. Todd, you want to add something?
Yeah. I think I was going to talk a little bit about the briefing to council here in a couple of weeks, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself to the group. My name's Todd Justice. I'm the new compliance coordinator, which basically means that I am responsible for managing most of our zoning and code enforcement folks, including the noise compliance officer. And I have a few years of experience with code and zoning enforcement in other places before I came to Asheville. Before that, I was a officer in the Army for 20 years. So mostly I'm a planner and a thinker and that kind of thing. So I have dug into this problem, particularly since I had a couple of conversations with Rick and some emails with him and a few other people. And I would encourage you to do the working group and try and get some people together to think about it. But it's going to be a difficult thing to do, to manage, because we're talking about motor vehicles, and the only people that are authorized to stop motor vehicles are law enforcement officers, which means that this immediately falls into the lap of APD and what they're able or willing to enforce. I do believe that it would be very easy for the city to expand the motor vehicle ordinance, noise ordinance, which is currently based on a general statute that I think was pretty much put in place a few decades ago to address motorcycles with straight pipes, which used to be very popular. Motorcycles wouldn't have a muffler and they would go around and be very loud and aggressive sounding, and that was kind of what that statute was made to address. It only addresses vehicles without a muffler or with an improperly functioning muffler. And so the problem we have today is we have mufflers that work just fine at creating loud noise, which is what they're designed to do. So they kind of automatically fall out of any legal statute that's out there now. I think, though, that it would be fairly easy for the city to put in a no revving ordinance. When you're dealing with ordinances, you want something that can be very clearly answered with a yes or a no. Is this in violation or is it not? That's the problem with the subjective standards that we have in the noise ordinance now when it comes to residential neighborhoods is what's subjective. The majority of our complaints, the person's really upset because subjectively they feel like they're being disturbed. You go down the street to the next house and the resident there is like, I didn't hear anything at all. So what do we enforce and what do we not enforce in those cases? That's something that my staff has to wrestle with because we operate within how the ordinance is written. So anyway, revving engines. So in most cases, and I think most of our complaints about motor vehicles come from the downtown area where we have these vehicles that come through and they stop at a light and they put their transmission in neutral or push in the clutch and they're just sitting there revving the engine and they get into competitions with one another and it's all about the noise they can create, right? Well, that's very easy for a police officer to say, you're in violation, you're revving your engine, that's not allowed in this particular area. If they have loud mufflers and they're just driving down the street, they're never going to get above 2,000 RPM. And they're not going to be, they're going to have some noise, but it's not going to be a nuisance type noise. It's just going to be a little loud and they're accelerating, they're moving out of the area. They're not going to be there for very long. So I don't think we need to shape it to regulate that. But just sitting there at an intersection, revving your engine, that would be very easy for us to enforce.
Okay, that's some helpful information. Thank you. Okay, so with that, do we have anyone that wants to take the lead on a working group of vehicle noise? Reb, you're muted. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I said I could do it, but I would like to have a further conversation with you, Todd, about that. What the scope of the study would be. There seems to be some areas that are impossible to enforce and some that may be enforceable. And if we could narrow the scope for the research, that would be good.
I will say that a bulk of those vehicle noise complaints that come in are related to just music being played at unnecessary levels as well.
I agree. We have that issue. Even motorcycles with just loud, blaring music has been disturbing.
Okay.
I think engine braking is prohibited in the new ordinance. Is that right?
Yeah, that was included in the old general statute too, that our ordinance is based on.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you, Reb.
Mm-hmm.
And is it, Rick, go ahead.
Reb, I'll share the contact information with the person from downtown who is fairly highly upset by how this is and seem to be eager to participate. So eager, in fact, that letters have already been sent to City Council.
Okay.
Okay, next order of business is remote meeting policy update and discussion from Haley.
Okay. So we've kind of already briefly went over this last month, but basically council is gearing up to come up with are we back in person or are we going to be remote sort of policy? And from my understanding right now, they'll be voting, I believe, at the end of the month on that policy. And if they go with it as written, it'll basically say that it's up to the advisory board if they want to go back to in person or if they want to stay remote. But whichever they decide for themselves will be what they need to lock into for a year. So if we decide we want to be remote, we'll be remote for a year. And this doesn't apply to special meetings as far as I know. I still have to reach up to the clerk's office, like in regards to our retreat, for example, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't apply to special meetings. But for all regularly held meetings, you have to go one route or the other. So we don't necessarily have to vote on this today. We could vote on it at our next meeting, but come October, they're going to be looking to us to see, are we remote or are we in person? If their policy passes. Antoinette, does that sound right? Have I?
That is exactly right. I do think there is a requirement, and I can't remember exactly which way, that it would be a 2/3 vote for one of the options. I just can't remember which one exactly it is. But again, that won't be until the full council decides to make it so. Which option is the 2/3? I don't remember.
It's remote, so to do remote it requires a supermajority.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Really quick, you mentioned they would be voting on this next month, potentially.
End
For
of this
this month?
Oh, okay. When would, if they decided that we had to conduct all our meetings in person, when would that take effect?
I'm thinking it would probably take effect for our October meeting if they go that route. But I don't think that's what they're proposing. I think they're proposing to vote on that choice or not. But if the choice gets voted down, then I think it would default to in person. I'm not 100% on that,
Yeah,
but that's my
Carmel,
understanding.
Yeah, you get the noise advisory board. You'll decide how you want to meet, whether that's in person or remote, and that'll probably be, like Haley said, probably for your October meeting. But it's up to you to make that meeting format decision. Once you've made that, though, you need to carry that through for the entire year of meetings.
Okay.
Okay, I guess
Yeah.
We can discuss this in more details later, but just as a quick side note, I will be in Finland for the entire months of November and December personally, but as far as how that might affect everything, I'm not sure. I'll still be, of course, available for these meetings. It's not a problem. You know, I'm not dropping off the face of the earth, but I won't be able to meet in person, obviously. And I can discuss that more later, but yeah.
Rick, you have. Oh, go ahead, Haley.
I was going to say, you all are welcome to have discussion on this now. I mean, it's not a bad time to discuss now, like which way you all are leaning. We do have time on the agenda for it.
And let me chime in for just a moment. If it is in person, I believe, again, it has not passed the full council. I believe with in person, the option of remote does not extend to a member who's not in person. Does that make sense? So it's fully remote or not.
Gotcha.
But what happens to the person if that person can't make that in-person meeting?
That person misses the meeting.
Well, yes. Okay.
So think of how it was before COVID.
That's why you have multiple members, so you can have somebody out and still have enough votes to carry a motion.
Got it.
Rick, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so two things, especially for our new members who probably haven't read all the fine print yet. You're only permitted to miss 1/4 of the annual meetings before you're technically a member not in good standing of the board. Right? That's the fine print. So I have a similar situation to Carmelo, except in February and March.
Mm-hmm.
I will be somewhere substantially warmer and sunnier for those 2 entire months next year. So I will tip my hand to my vote. I'll be placing my vote for continuing to do virtual. But I do have one question, and maybe this is in the fine print or not having been thought. Since, as we see with Liliana today, I think she's in A109 at the offices there. So technically, if there were 2 or 3 of us there who actually wanted to be face-to-face because we're sick and tired of doing Zoom meetings, we could be running a hybrid meeting, right? So it would be, show up in the conference room if you want to, but as long as that conference room is set up to be appropriately set for,
Streaming.
Google Meets, you could do both, and it would still be considered a remote meeting, right?
I don't know.
That I'd have to ask the clerk on. It's possible it might be okay. I just don't want to set any weird precedents because I know there's been a lot of people who have been pushing for hybrid meetings, and just right now staff capacity hasn't been there to accommodate hybrid for every board and commission. We just don't have a policy surrounding that right yet. But it's certainly something we could discuss. I'm always happy to go to the clerk and see what our options are.
Yeah, so I'm on the same email list you are, Haley. I think everything associated with boards and commissions, and there's strong arguments, which I'm sure are going to show up at every city council meeting until they make this decision, that A, it shouldn't be a supermajority, it should just be a majority, and B, that in today's world, when we want inclusiveness, we're basically excluding people who can't achieve transportation to a remote location on a monthly schedule. So it seems sort of inconsistent with the goal of boards and commissions being highly equitable and highly inclusive to then say, you got to get to this building, which may or may not be close to a bus stop, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted everybody who's not stuck in the middle of these never-ending email chains that go back and forth 4 times a day to know that there's a lot of pressure from a certain segment, and I too would like to have the flexibility while I'm away to still participate and do my homework, and I won't be able to do that if I'm 3,000 miles away from here.
Heard. Just to discuss this now, I would rather do remote for the same reasons, because I already have dates and places that I have to be in outside of Asheville in February, and working on a potential consulting gig that would take me out of town a significant amount of time, off and on. So, which I still want to participate and work my schedule around it, but I just wouldn't be able to do that if it was in person. So open to hearing what others have to say about that.
I've already done a few remotely of our past meetings, and so I'm with you guys on that.
Okay. Sounds like a lot of us are in agreement. So, yeah, well, we'll further that conversation, but it sounds like a lot of us are on the same page, and we'll see whoever our new board member is and how they feel about that. So, any thoughts from the staff as well? I mean, y'all are part of these meetings too. So I wonder, if it's easier for you, or you would prefer in person, Antoinette and Todd and Haley, and I don't know how often Ben's going to be in our meetings, but
Yeah. I feel like the remote meetings have a lot of positive. I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides. There's things that happen in face-to-face meetings that don't necessarily always happen remotely, but I do think the remote opens up a lot of doors for people to participate.
It would be nice if we'd be allowed to do it both ways. Like someone else mentioned, like a couple of us that want to get together and meet remote, or if we were allowed that flexibility, I would keep that into consideration.
So we did a focus group meeting in that very room, where with just a little bit of technical help from people in that building, the focus group, which wasn't a city board and commission or anything, managed to facilitate 10 people in that room, 1 person remote. So I just like to think that there was a way that didn't have to cause the whole city staff and IT team to stand on their head.
Right.
If a few of us wanted to come to a conference room and actually see each other and shake our hands. And hopefully we could work that out. I mean, as a person who didn't know anything about Zoom 2 years ago and who can now spin it around in every possible direction it ever could go, there just must be a way to do the same thing with Google Meet.
Todd, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I don't know how many of you were involved in government before COVID became everybody's reality. But I think that by statute, the expectation has always been that the board meets at a location that is open to the public so that the public can come and listen to what the board is saying, what decisions are being made, et cetera. And when COVID came down and the state realized that they weren't going to be able to continue with these public forums, they had to come up with an alternative. And that's where the Zoom meetings and all of that stuff they actually wrote documentation explaining to local governments how they were supposed to do this and what the requirements are. Now, I don't know that means that when the governor rescinds all of the COVID requirements here in a few weeks, if he hasn't done already, I'm not sure the exact date, that all that goes away and we're statutorily mandated to go back to public gatherings with at least the board there. I mean, the meetings themselves have always been televised since YouTube, kind of came about, and that was the medium that local governments were using. But I'm not sure that you're going to have much of an option, I guess is what I'm saying, here fairly soon. And there are others in the city staff that can speak to that. But my understanding is that all of these online meetings have been the exception rather than the rule, mostly due to COVID and those restrictions.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks for that info, Todd.
So I'll just add real quick. So the governor did lift the state of emergency on August 15th. So we're actually out of that now. And this option that you've been given by Haley today, that is the city attorney's, what they believe is the legal option that you have as an advisory board. So Todd, you're right. I think city council is already back to in-person meetings. It's conversation about council committees, but the legal office has said that under the conditions given today, that advisory boards can continue to meet remotely. Although you're right, Todd, that I don't think that was ever expressly envisioned in the statutes years ago. So if the supermajority of you want to do the remote meetings, that's great. That'll be your future for the next year. Rick, you've asked a really good question about A109 and the fact that Liliana is sitting there today. So we'll follow up on that and have that. Haley, we can probably, Todd, do that as an email follow-up to the board.
I'll also know a lot more about our hybrid capabilities in that room after tomorrow, helping out with one of the board and commission realignment working group meetings. And we're going to do a hybrid in there. So we'll see how that goes as well. Might need to order some new equipment if the city clerk's okays it for us.
Because I thought for the hybrid one, it was actually an outside entity that was helping with that and not so much staff. Am I mistaken?
Well, staff got it set up, and we do have an outside entity that is bringing extra equipment if it's needed. So that'll kind of help us see what is needed on top of what we already have.
Yeah, and then I encourage y'all to follow up with the city attorney regarding hybrid as an option, because I believe that the default is in person, which is why the 2/3 for hybrid is being suggested. And I don't know that hybrid was necessarily by statute given as an option, but I don't know that to be true. So please follow up with the city attorney to see if that is in fact even an option.
Thank you, Antoinette. When I reach out to the city clerk, I'll be sure to CC attorney, and that's a great idea. Thank you.
Rick, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just two things. First, for the people who are going to run the experiment tomorrow with the boards and commissions group, think back to the bad old days when there was no video and you had to do teleconferences, and you needed a really good speakerphone in the middle of the table so that everybody could hear. You need the equivalent of that in these hybrid meetings. We had to pass a cell phone around in that room because the microphone on the camera on top of the big TV wasn't hooked up or working right. And people sell this stuff. You know, there's lots of vendors now that would let you plug a USB port into the computer that's running the video and run a, you know, either one speaker in the center of the table, or like they used to have in the old days, that a bunch of little cords that run out to all around the table so everybody can hear. That's the key element for running a hybrid. I haven't done it yet, but have tried to do it a couple of different other ways, and it worked out badly. And then, not to make this get to be too complicated, if city council stays where they are with just the two options, is it then, and we pick remote, do we then break a rule by having any two members of the board in the same location at the same time? Because that essentially becomes a hybrid, right? If I were to come to Haley's desk because I happen to be in the building there working on something related to zoning and all that sort of stuff, and I couldn't get back to my own home to do the Zoom, but I could sit next to her, would that then break the rules, quote unquote? And that would make it a hybrid meeting. We'd be a shame if we discovered that in a bad way. So I probably should ask that question.
I think that's the question, Rick, is like today we made an accommodation for Liliana. I mean, this isn't intended to be a hybrid meeting. This is where we had, and there may be other board members where the city has to make an accommodation for whatever reason. So I think that's kind of what makes your question interesting. I mean, we didn't choose to have a hybrid meeting today. We had a board member that didn't have access to the proper equipment to have the remote meeting. So we made an accommodation in one of our conference rooms. So, and as Antoinette recommended, and advice that we'll take is we'll kind of lay this scenario out to the legal office just to make sure we've thought through what we're doing here. I think that's an interesting question though, Rick.
Yeah, it's just a special case that, you know, it could happen. And we just need to know if that wasn't allowed, because then you'd have to make a special accommodation for me to run into a conference room and use the system there or whatever the case would be. So, okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on that? Moving on, last order of business, new business is upcoming council brief from Todd.
All right, so we've been working with these slides for the presentation that we're going to give. Ben's going to give, with me kind of providing some backup cheerleading if necessary. But just to short and simple, there's basically 4 key takeaways that Ben wants to talk about. The first one being the fact that we've been able to reduce APD's man hours that they're using to address noise, which is something the council was kind of focused on. The fact that the noise complaints are really, we only have data, of course, for the last 12 months of the new ordinance being in place, but the data that we have for the last 12 months is pretty much in line with previous years as far as noise complaints. So there hasn't been a dramatic increase or decrease really in the number of complaints. I think that we present the argument well that we have been able to address the complaints more efficiently and to more folks' satisfaction than probably previous years, but the actual number of complaints has not really increased. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the chronic sources of complaints that we were able to address, some of the business locations, some of the venues that were creating just, repeated complaints over and over again, and how we kind of looked at those and addressed those. And then the last bullet has a lot to do with some of the challenges that we're dealing with, which we've talked about here, the subjective standard and the motor vehicles and how we can go about addressing that a little better. These slides, of course, will be public. So I think that when Haley and I get finished tweaking them, is it later this week? Haley, is that our deadline or is it next week?
We should try to have this done by a week prior. So the council meeting will be on the 27th. We're aiming to get the slides done by the 20th.
Right. So at that point, we'll share them with everybody. And so you can look at them and have an idea what Ben's going to be talking to the council about based on the slides at that point.
Great, thanks, Todd. Any questions or comments on the council briefing? No?
You know I'd have to raise my hand.
I heard it, but I didn't see it. So I'm like,
So I just want to make sure I got this straight. The Noise Advisory Board will see the slides at the same time the public does. Those slides will be final. We will have no input on those slides.
Yes, this is a staff update to council.
So if a board member has any trouble with any of those slides, then our remedy is to attend the city council meeting and to sign up to speak there.
Correct. You would speak as a member of the public rather than a member of the board.
So let me ask real quick, is there a venue for the board to actually take things to the council? Or do you have to schedule time at their public council meetings in order for you to advise the council on the board's thoughts or comments?
So they're able to make recommendations to council, and
How do they do that?
Antoinette, can you speak a little bit about how you all receive recommendations and how those are typically handled?
Well, actually, we usually receive updates at least yearly, but anytime you want to make a formal recommendation, put it in written form, and you can send it to me, and I will send it to my colleagues, or you can send it to council and under the council group email. That'll work well too. So anytime you have a recommendation, just memorialize it in writing and send it on.
Vote on it.
Oh,
It has to come from a vote of.
Because I thought we were anticipating a recommendation from the board since the beginning of the inception to see, where we are, the pros and cons of the current ordinance. So we are anticipating that from you. So give it to me.
So Rick, I just Ben Woody. So the slide deck's not intended. I think it's actually going to be pretty transactional, quite frankly. It's what we promised to do as staff before the board was even created. I stood in front of council and said, we'll come back in a year and tell you how it looked. And that's all this is. It's just really more from a staff perspective about what this year has been like for us in terms of trying to implement the ordinance that was adopted. It's going to be data heavy. It's the same numbers you look at every month. It's the same numbers that are on the dashboard. Certainly don't want to be adversarial. So I would hope that if there's there's a slide that really gets you sideways, I would hope that we can just have a conversation about that. And we'll try to share it early to give you a chance to look at it.
And you know what? Let me go ahead and add something from my perspective. When we were voting on the ordinance, some on staff had mentioned to me that the majority of the complaints came from neighborhoods and a disproportionate number came from Black and Brown communities. Is there a way you can quantify that for just my personal benefit so I could see, I think there was a thought that the majority of the complaints Delta Round music in downtown. Can we quantify where things come from? So I'll know how to speak more precisely about the issue.
Yep, that's a good question, and we will. Noise complaints can be anonymous, so I could never tell you who the exact person is that complains per se. But what we can quantify is we can look at it by census block groups, and so each census block group will have a set of demographic characteristics, and so that's the way that we can quantify it. We can look at the proportion of noise complaints by census block group in previous years. We can look at it in this past year of data under the new ordinance, and I think that we can begin this complaint type, so we can kind of assess what type of complaint it was. And so I do think, Councilman Mosley, we can kind of shape that and quantify it and let you see, at least spatially, where the complaints are coming from and the nature of those complaints. And that's the kind of things we want to share in a couple of weeks.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Rick, we're just looking back over the last year. We're not making any recommendations for changes. We've identified a couple challenges, but I think they're common knowledge to everybody. My personal view of all this is that's kind of the advisory board's job, is to look forward and come up with recommendations for changes or whatever. I mean, with input from us, but we're not I don't think it's since the advisory board exists, it's the advisory board that should be going to council and saying, hey, we think we should change this or change that or add this or add that. Not the city. If you didn't exist, then yes, we as a city would go and do those things. But I think that's the advisory board's role.
So I think I don't necessarily anticipate any problem. This is just a new process for me, where we've been working very closely month in, month out, and we've had conversations. I think some before you came, Todd. For example, there was a free-spirited one back before we went off every month about whether the outreach program that staff has implemented with multifamily residents was actually going to yield any decrease or improvement in that sort of thing. And it seemed like your predecessor and Daniel as well we're concerned about how that's all going to work out, and whether all that hard work to outreach and talk to managers and get them to be more proactive in dealing with the bad apples in their things, in their multifamily things was going to work. And so there's always been sort of this funny line between what the advisory board does and what you guys see on the street every single day in terms of improvement, and whether a strategy worked or not. And I just didn't, necessarily want to be caught up board on a victory lap that we've tried to talk about, but didn't think we had enough data at that point in time. So that's all. I just wanted to know how this works, since we're struggling with a bunch of these things as a board. I just wanted to not be saying anything in opposition to what you guys would be saying if we just weren't prepared to say anything yet, I guess.
Well, I think that they would both say that the outreach program to the multifamily residential areas has been actually very beneficial and has taken a lot of the work off of them. Daniel will he knows most of the property managers by name, has their contact information. If he gets a complaint out of one of those neighborhoods, the first question is, have you gone and talked to so-and-so? I talk to her at least once a week. She's very cooperative. You should go tell her your problem, and she'll probably handle it for you. And that has taken a lot of work off of his plate, so to speak. So I think that particular case has been very beneficial looking back over, the last year. And I see, just as we would normally be working with the city council, like I said, we're going to work with the noise advisory board in the same capacity. So if you have questions of us, if you want more data, if you want to know how this area is going or that area is going or whatever, just reach out and talk to us. And I'm not trying to push responsibility off on the noise advisory boards that I don't have any. I just see you as a different conduit of information that me and the noise compliant officer have to take into account and address. So it's not anything other than that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, everyone. If there is a way for us to see those slides, that would be great. So, okay, so next we will check in with Haley to see if we have anybody waiting for public comment.
See, we do have some callers on the line. Let me see if anybody would like to provide comment. Callers on the line, if you'd like to provide comment, please tap *3. I do see someone that might have their hand raised for public comment. We'll try them out first. Yeah. Caller on the line, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. This is Jeff Thompson. I may be the retired attorney that Rick was referring to before, I think. One of my main concerns, and I would like to talk more with Rick about that, would be the issue of the particularly automobiles and motorcycles, amongst others. But I have very strong feelings that this is a legislative issue. I have talked with Todd also, and I do believe that we do need to put teeth into this issue, and it has to be based on enforcement. Nothing can really happen if it's not adequately enforced, such as Greenville does, and some other communities do that. This is intentional noise. There's not a constituency that would, I think, be opposed to strong legislation that makes this a traffic offense that can be enforced by the police. And I think that Greenville uses off-duty police. We could possibly find funding for that if the city council has some trouble with that. I think there are a number of people I know that would be happy to kind of participate in some kind of program like that. So I think that this is very intentional, and it's not transitory at lights, or they actually have groups that parade downtown as late as 2 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes even later, that they circle. I can watch them from our windows. They have a path. They just go around. They go by hotels. They go by the communities. They go by the condos. So I think these are things that we can attack, and that we have to make an effort. And there are communities that are doing that, but we really have to put teeth out of it. This is intentional noise designed to interfere, and the louder the better. It's not like political speech. And the other thing, just to throw out real quickly, because I think Todd did cover everything pretty well there. Stuff like the band shell is suddenly being used by kind of pop-up preachers and stuff with loud amplifiers. Some type of licensing or some type of controlled use of these facilities would be, I think, advisable. But again, I think we have to consider altering some laws, and I don't think we find much exception to it, because it's not like having a restaurant opposing it, or the hotels or some other businesses. These are just people trying to make noise and making the downtown unlivable. I think I just ran out of things.
Thank you. So thank you, Jeff. Callers on the line, if we have anybody else that would like to speak, please tap *3 now. Comments are to be limited to 3 minutes. Okay, we have somebody else that just entered the speaker queue.
To the Noise Advisory Board, my name is Tom Stewart. I live at 20 Sylvan Avenue in the Montford Hills area. We have several residents of this area have pretty deep concerns about migration of music, of a music venue coming into our neighborhood. And we've put those concerns into a letter that I see is in your packets. I would appreciate your attention to that letter. We take a lot of happiness in the two different documents that you reviewed during your meeting here involving decibel limits for noise and the migration of noise into other areas. I think both of those are issues that are impacting our neighborhood. And we want to keep our concerns before you and commit to work with you and the music venue and anybody else to try to resolve the issue. But we want you to know it's an issue. So thank you for your review of that document.
Thank you, caller. Let's see. Do any of our other callers on the line have public comment? If so, please tap *3 now. Okay, I think that's it for public comment.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, callers. Jeff, if you're still listening, yes, your name came up, or not your name, but you came up, and I'm sure we'll be in touch with getting you potentially part of a working group. And Tom, yes, we received your letter. Thank you for that and for the other residents. I can give you a little bit of information to tell you that I was CC'd on an email of Salvage Station working with a team of outside engineers to work to mitigate the sound that as it travels to Montford. So I'm just being kept in on the loop on that, and I'm going to ask them to make sure to reach out to the citizens and let them know the progress and the work that they're trying to do to address the issues that you and others have. So thanks for your comment, and we are aware of it, and we'll continue to do whatever we can to be supportive with the mitigation. Board, any other questions or discussion for these comments that came up? No? Okay. Well, if there are no objections, we will adjourn this meeting. Are there any objections to adjourning this meeting?
No.
Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. I will not say when our next meeting is because I'm not sure when that will be. Because we're going to have a doodle.
Yeah. I will be in touch with everyone soon. It'll be this week.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.